Hi, welcome to It Takes a Village. I am Jenny Schultz-Thomas, and I'm joined with Sarah Rental-Jones. We're excited to be back talking about, on this podcast, what connects us in life. And we really talk a lot about community building and honest and deep connections and what it takes to build communities of belonging. So we are here in January. It's a new year. We've been discussing different opportunities to lean into the year with honesty and the depths of insights that we've gained from the past year. One of the things that I think it's sort of like a buzzword for, in my realm anyway, a buzzword for the new year is the word awe. And I mean, I feel like that could be a lovely buzzword anytime, right? Just sort of, but what is awe and what does awe mean? I recently came upon this book, Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life by Dr. Keltner. Interestingly enough, the book is amazing, but his research actually helped really shift the landscape in terms of like our understanding of our neuro-emotions and how the nuances of our emotional selves really do track and create communities of deep belonging, right? It used to be the research of happiness or joy was you have a few emotions, right? Joy, pain, and sorrow. And kind of leaning into our emotional selves was the opposite of enlightenment, right? It was a lesser thing to be emotional or to connect to deep emotions. And so I think several of these scientists who are studying the emotional side of our humanity have really opened up what it means to live into the fullness of who we are. So have you been thinking about awe, or is this also a buzzword in your realm lately?
Well, I think I've caught it from from you and from our discussions at staff meeting, and I think several people got it as a star word for 2025. But I really love what you're saying, and in a way I'm learning from you. As we talk about these things, I'll be talking about them more from just like what comes to mind as we bring up these different characteristics. But I think that when I first hear awe, it just reminds me of like how amazing it feels to be in a state of awe. And it really can just kind of shift. I would imagine one of the things he's talking about in here is it shifts even like your nervous system.
Yes.
Right. And I think I mentioned it when we were talking about David Brooks' book, but I always think of this line from a guest on Brene Brown's podcast who said, we used to think that we were thinking beings who feel.
Right.
But it turns out we are feeling beings who think.
Yes. I love that sort of this, it's like the great reversal of like the either or. So often, everything about life we've created into polarities, right? It's this or that. As we get closer to the Lenten season, our theme, right, for Lent is sort of so much about that. It's like in between, right? What happens in the middle, right? Because we aren't this or that. We aren't a thinking or an emotional presence or being. But yes, I think the pendulum needs to swing back the other way. I remember even being in leadership institutions and kind of developing for the last 2 decades of my career. It's like early on in developmental psychology even, there wasn't this deep sort of lean into the emotional state, right? It's, if you think of like even philosophy, right? I think, therefore I am versus, right? To be is to be believed, right? So you have both of this, Kierkegaard, you've got both sides of this. The only way you can lean into the emotional self is to like refute, right? To be a resistor to the rest of the academic world, right? But now I think opening up our fuller understanding in both academia as well as our, human selves, we are giving a lot more to the next generation to be in touch with, right? Their emotional self, which is really your ego self.
Right.
There's not a separate one.
Right.
A holistic self, right?
Right. Well, and I think especially perhaps as women, right? After generations of being labeled hysterical, overly emotional, right? It's like you don't want to show that side of yourself, and yet without it being integrated, it's doing you a disservice because then it becomes even more the shadow,
right?
Instead of something that you're aware of. It's not like you said, it's not like you can just sit around and be only feelings, just a puddle all day long, you know. which is, of course, even that example shows where my mind goes, where I think about feelings, right? It's about like sad or yes.
Yeah.
But having awareness and emotional intelligence, I think is so huge. And we've done ourselves a disservice if we discount it. And I think it's really wonderful that it's becoming more and more acceptable, without being overdone either. There's has to be balance in all things. We have to function. And even when we're, over the moon, happy, sometimes we have to come down from that and be serious because not everyone's in that place with us. But being able to bring everything together.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. When you're talking, I'm thinking about, so much of Keltner's research is about even going beyond our own human consciousness that sees ourselves sort of as like a prime place in the unfolding and the evolution of civilization, history, humanity, but really all things and all living things. And so awe, and we're going to get to all of these different 8 wonders of awe, but awe, as he has defined it in like 17 pages, but then he boils it down to one sentence, is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. Right? And so he gives us this, for me, this great opportunity to be reminded of our place in the universe. It's like, it's not only the human experience, but the human experience, I feel like, is one of this benevolent gratitude where we get to be in awe of this amazing, incredible world, right? Of the things we see, the things we experience, and then to be caught, and he talks about this in the book, but to be caught off guard by the smallness of our own species. But even still, we have this, I think, the most encouraged opportunity, right, to be prime leaders, right, in this vast universe. So to be so small in the evolution of the earth, right, of the universe, we are telling the story. We are kind of dictating what's happening to so much of that universe. And so it puts us in this great place of gratitude and accountability. It's like, wow. And he talks so much even about the psychology of lessening the self and kind of loosening the smallness of the self that we imagine. And that vastness, that awe, it's like, wow, there's something so much more than what I'm being trapped in right now.
Yes.
And what that one acute emotion. So awe really does shift our physiology, right? It shifts our emotional capacity to grow and change. And then I think we can be change agents, right? Kind of all working toward this same unified gratitude for the experience of being alive and being connected to this beautiful earth. So let's dive in and talk about these wonders. When I was like first reading, I was like, oh, the 8 wonders of the world. Which is great, the 8 wonders of awe. The first one that we can kind of talk about is the sublime in nature. I feel like this is just, if you were to say, maybe myself, like when do you experience awe? It is definitely, that's probably my number one, right? In looking at the magnitude of the earth's beauty and the difference in the landscapes and topography and how it's so much more vast, whether it's the stars in the universe or the ocean, right? The mountains are my number one place to stand and feel like these mountains are still going to stand even on my worst day. Yeah. And I'm reminded, right?
Yeah.
So what about you, Sarah? Like, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think about waves. Like, the ocean to me is so vast. And I mean, if I really think about how deep it is and what's in there, right? then I get kind of overwhelmed and almost terrified.
Yes.
And I am not a person to go on a cruise ship because I'm like, who knows what's in that ocean?
I do not want to
be in the middle of everything. But I love the feeling of standing, like Ho'okipa Beach on Maui is amazing. There are the word that always comes to mind is majestic. Like the waves are it's not a swimming beach, but it's just so beautiful. And then even just thinking about the way that the waves and the water are connected both to the cycles of the moon and then that they touch different continents. Like I remember being on the beach in Ocean City, New Jersey and thinking the same water, the same Atlantic Ocean that's lapping up against these shores is lapping up against the shores of West Africa, right? I mean, obviously it's not exactly the same. So much happens between there and here, but that's just amazing. Just like stretches your mind to think about.
That's so, and that majestic, like, I think you touched on something, awe, as Keltner describes, and as you describe, like as humans kind of, you just experience it, is both terrifying and overwhelmingly beyond your understanding. And so then you fall into it, which is like this deep joy, gratitude thing that you can't really name, which is awe, right? But he talks about how so much of it, he does this research, and it's what they call weird and non-weird, right? Weird is sort of a white educated kind of thing that we just ask our own kind of humans, right? And then we tell the story. But the non-weird is, it's universal across different cultures. They've done this research and asked for stories from Africa, Asia, India, all over the place. And you're getting this same kind of terrified and overwhelmed with a oneness of understanding that something transcends us, right? So I think that's this fine line, right? Something that scares you, it's because, wow, the ocean is so much bigger than you understand. But you have this deep respect, like reverence. It's like awe, reverence, and you're taken in by it. If you ever, there's, in South Africa, there's this area at the point of the Cape of Good Hope. And you can go there and stand. There's penguins all over the beach, which is beautiful. But you can go out there and stand, and you can kind of see from that point two of the oceans coming together, like you're talking about. The Indian Ocean actually comes into those waters, and there's this sort of ripple. I remember standing there and feeling like I just like am falling. My own self is just like evaporated because of the expanse, that I could not experience anything more full than this moment. You know, that I would never have this same experience where I understood that what it was to be a part of something so much more important and significant and beautiful, but that we were a part of it, right? So, right, there's no way to really describe this awe. It's experiencing it, which I love, because some things you can't just talk about.
Right.
Right? You experience it, and then you give story to it, which a lot of this book is about. But yeah, he he gives examples from the Grand Canyon, the Himalayas, revered by Buddhist and Hindu traditions. So he digs deep into the different cultural stories and interpretations of awe, which I think also gives us this deep interconnectedness to others that we don't even know, right? Yeah. Let's go to the next. So the next one that he talks about, which I think is so, I love this one. In staff meeting, I think everyone's eyes were like, yes, but he calls it collective effervescence. What do you feel? I mean, when you hear that, what does that even, it just gives me chills.
Yeah. Well, I have an example of it, which is not, is actually kind of very common, but really did happen last Saturday. I was at Irene's swim meet, and I was helping volunteer on the pool deck, and there was just this moment where the kids were swimming and they were playing music. I definitely think music is well, we're getting to that next. But the musical component was like some kind of, inspirational music, like you'd hear it in a movie while someone, like kind of rocky, training music, getting all pumped up and inspired. But so the music was playing and the kids were all just like cheering for each other. And it was so, I just got like teary. Somebody's going to look at me on the pool deck. Like, what is her deal?
Oh, no.
But it was it was just this sense of like, look at these good kids cheering for each other, really like hyping each other up, encouraging each other. It was like the musical component to bring in that element. And I don't know, it just felt really, it was just this like very lovely human moment.
Oh, that's beautiful, Sarah. I'm going to say, like, in Adrienne Marie Brown's work and her emergent strategy research and book, she was talking about she used football and some of her as a metaphor in teaching and talking about something. And then she was like, I'm so against sports, right? Because they're such white capitalist like ways of, and I remember as an athlete kind of being punched in the stomach thinking like, oh, right? Because yes, and what you're talking about is not the sport, it's the collective effervescence, right? That happens when people gather, all celebrating the same thing. And what you're describing is so many of these areas at once. Right? This beautiful understanding of what it means to sit here and be a collective neighboring commons, supporting each other, the swim moms sitting out there like you love to be, right? But this comes from French sociologist Emile Durkheim. He's the first one who coined this collective effervescence. And what you said describes beautifully. His phrase speaks to the qualities of this experience. We feel like we are buzzing and crackling with some life force that merges people into a collective self, a tribe, an oceanic we. And he said, too, across these 26 cultures that they did this work in, people told these stories of collective effervescence at weddings, christenings, quinceañeras, bars, bar mitzvahs, graduations, sports celebrations, and beyond. So this is this deep sort of, it's not just me, but it's we. And I think that's, if we could all get there, instead of, I mean, I've been at baseball games as a mom, and it's like, there is no we.
Oh, right.
It is like me, myself, and I, and my kid, and if you even look at me, I'm going to punch you in the face. You know, it's like, so we need to claim these moments when we can and name the power in it. Yeah. Right? It's losing the self and just experiencing the we. Right. Which is hard to do sometimes in this world that we've created, right, in the West.
Right. Well, and I was thinking, too, like, I feel like it's so easy to talk ourselves out of these moments, right? Because we know, and as we keep talking about it, the phrase that comes to mind when I think of transcendence is always this sense of like everything is okay, right? Like all is right with the world, which empirically is false.
Yeah.
Because so many things are not right.
Right.
And the feeling is really important because of all that it does. Like I'm excited to read more about the science. And so it's, and I found myself sort of critiquing myself on that pool deck thinking like, you are making this meaningful. And someone else might be like, what are you talking about? I don't feel that at all. But I feel like that's part of what we do too as spiritual leaders is that we notice things that can be meaningful and we invite people to see the meaning in it. We make things sacred that maybe would just be overlooked. Yeah. And we help to develop that, and that matters. Yeah. And I'm glad that there's proof that it does.
It does.
It makes me feel happy.
It matters. Because, what we really believe is that spirit animates, and brings the extraordinary to the ordinary. And it's in the ordinary when we can really see what's real, right? We were just talking about sort of the text about burning up the chaff and what's left over. And what's left over is really the human connection and how we can see that maybe there's a mess when we go home, or maybe there's a lot else, right? But we have these transcendent moments. Then we can know that things are a mess, but so that, and, right, we are okay. Because we have the power, right, to transform. I mean, he even talks about and points as research-based data shows that if you just give yourself these moments of awe, you can kind of reset and recalibrate your own system. It doesn't mean that the world is all right now. Right. It means that we, right, have the disposition, right, and the connectedness spiritually, emotionally, and even, I think, throughout our neurological, like, synapses, we are now prepared to face it with more grace and humility. So I love that. I think sometimes we have to start coaching yourself.
Yes.
You can let that bypass you and go, this is dumb. I'm just going to be another, like, cynical, who cares, right? Because that's sort of like the name of the game a lot of times. Instead of just being open, right, and broken open. And then the next step is like letting it spill out and overflow. I don't care. This is so great, right? Right. And the person who's beside you actually is wanting that invitation. Right. He doesn't know how to find it.
Exactly. Well, and I love what you said about coaching yourself, because I think for me at times if I end up hearing this little critical voice that says this is silly, I have to coach myself and say, I'm actually of more service to other people. I'm kinder to other people. I have more capacity to do things for others, to be there for them. I have all of those things when I cultivate this versus letting the criticism and the cynicism inside take over. And then actually I am less of service.
So true. It's like, what do we need we need to be filled up to overflow. Right. And how do you fill up? If you're the self-critic and just give yourself to, that's probably true. I'm going to stop. Then the cultivation piece is stifled, and then you aren't even able to receive from someone else. Right. Right? When someone else says a word of gratitude, if we self-critique first, and that's our default, we can't really absorb, right, someone else's overflow that really is the building block of our own. Right?
Yeah,
that
so true.
Spirit cultivation. Well, you mentioned music, Sarah, which is definitely a wonder of life. I think most of us would agree if you've ever been at that concert or that orchestral performance or just listening and singing with your best friend in your car when you're like 17 or 45, right? Music, it transports people to new dimensions of symbolic meaning and experiences at concerts, listening quietly to a piece of music, chanting in a religious ceremony, simply singing with others. He shares a really great story from Switzerland about being in a monastery, and this is from someone else, and it was freezing cold outside. The Romanesque church was only dimly lit, and you could hear Gregorian chants. And this person talked about this feeling of deep reverence for something bigger, and at the same time, a feeling of comfort. So it's both sort of that transcendent and incarnate experience that we have when we know that we are caught up, in God's care. I thought that was, I got chills just reading that. It's like 2 sentences. And it's like, how often do we have that? And then how often do we give ourselves time to process it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the really impactful moments of a worship service is singing together, right? Like that's something that we don't experience in a lot of other contexts.
Right.
And that's something that really, I think, combined with the sacred words that we read and the text that we are learning from, and then being in a spirit of prayer, but then the music is really important. And I think especially when we sing together, I mean, I'm sure it's probably in here too, right? There's scientific proof that as people sing together, they have a bonding experience.
Yes.
And I know people that I've sung with, at NGLI, like we had some musicians in our class, and we would lead in worship often. That was how I actually got to know that my best friends from my class was our very first weekend when we were planning worship together, and I was in the music group. And I feel like we bonded over that in a real way that lasted us till now.
Oh gosh, yes. Music, I know. Music is so powerful.
Yeah.
I feel like so much of learning without words or learning without talking, right? Music is one of those things that is so universal, right? You can sing in a different language and not even know exactly what's happening or what the words mean. You can sort of get through it, and some oneness, right? Which definitely is this data, that shows that our brains like connect at a higher level when we're singing in that way. But music, I think, has a way of healing, a way of making space when nothing else can. I mean, if it's just singing Silent Night on Christmas Eve with that candle lit in the dark, I mean, the sort of oneness, the experience that happens is so powerful that you don't get that same kind of experience. I remember talking to Shannon a lot about this, because I was an athlete. I mean, I sang as like a choir voice just to do it, right? And she's like a lifelong singer, sang across the world, But we'd always joke about, but your knees are going to go out one day, but you could sing forever.
Oh.
Just a funny thing, like, well, music is something for everyone. You can listen, right, and it can change you. You can sing, even if you don't have this amazing, wonderful, great voice. Everyone, right, can sing. And I think that is a great metaphor for really the larger story of what he's talking about with awe, is that it's a coming together, right? It's this sort of utopic understanding or leaning into that we could all, everything that's pain and grief, everything would just kind of fall away and dissolve. And what would be left would be this beautiful oneness of healing and connection, this vibrant, right? Just a heartbeat, and that would be left. I think music for me is probably the most important in bringing people into that story, because it touches everyone. You can be an infant listening to Bach in your parents' womb.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I'm sure anyone who's listening, right, you could tell 15 different stories about how music has really impacted you and point to this transcendence of awe.
Absolutely.
The next one is sacred space. Wow. Yes. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the number one, highest mark for awe, but it definitely a big one across cultures. I feel like we have this great opportunity here on the Tri-Faith Commons to really, really gain the significance of what it means to be alive in sacred spaces with each other and be in any kind of sacred space and feel the oneness of spirit there, right, where differences fall away and we are clinging to the thing that is in our humanity that's calling out for oneness. And awe arises in places imbued with spiritual or historical significance. Mm-hmm. Like if you've ever been in Europe, right, those cathedrals all over the place they just look ancient and kind of falling, but they're just so alive with the prominence of historical sacred significance. That's an awe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think places where many things have happened, like standing in a place that has hosted lots of ceremonies or has had these monumental things happening, or just that has stood the test of time through different generations and epochs. And it's like, even I think of like this Gates Plow Tavern in York, Pennsylvania, but that was one of the places where like the founding fathers would meet and begin to draft our founding documents. And so I think that's a component to me. Sometimes it is the space itself and how beautiful it is, or how cavernous, open. And sometimes it's like, what has happened here throughout time that someone that I've read about in my history books was standing where I purportedly was standing where I'm standing now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And I think sacred, what we denote as sacred, right? Sometimes we think of just religious places or icons of certain religions, the Taj Mahal, certainly, those kinds of places. But also, a sacred place is a place that is alive with story, right? People go to these different places, even battlegrounds, right? Where with so much loss and grief and violence and all this, but the sacredness of what it means to hold humanity first, apart from what we have done, right? Or someone who stood on that platform and given a speech, no more, right? The sacredness is, I think, what we deem credible and worthy of humanity's acknowledgement. Even going to different places across, points in the Holocaust, right? Going to those significant sites, it's sort of this awe, the horror and awe of never again. I think so much of it is how we decide as humans to put draw a line in the sand or a stake in the ground. And it can either be for this deep relevance of, moving forward, or this sort of putting a hand up to no more, right? The sacredness is that we know there's something more, that we can transcend this moment, right? To something beyond. Well, gosh, we could talk about these forever. We've only made it halfway through. And so I think next week, we will have the 4 next wonders of awe to talk about. And, we'll just give you a little bit hint that those 4 are the vastness of life and death, moral beauty, big ideas and epiphanies, and then life's everyday miracles. Wow. I think awe is definitely becoming more than a buzzword for us. And what a privilege it is to imagine how we can lean more deeply into the beauty of God's Spirit showing up in our lives and in our community. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Hope you have a great week and that you find moments of awe in your own life.